It's Patrick with the Easier Business interview series, and I have Julie Ripley with me today talking about what it means to connect to your desires, your wants, the things that are most meaningful to you. And I think so much about the business owners can feel overwhelmed by all the claims that people make upon them, whether it's employees or customers. There's so much that we can get pulled in one direction or another. And when we're keeping our business going, there's all these obligations that pile up. And one of the things that I've enjoyed by getting to know Julie in the last year is how she's really helped me clarify some of my um, most meaningful priorities. And so I think we're going to talk about that today. If you've got a business and you feel there's sense you're pulled in too many directions, I think this is a conversation you'll enjoy with Julie, helping kind of get back to what matters.
Yeah.
Welcome, Julie.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah.
Honored to be your guest.
Well, I've enjoyed the perspective that you share with me over a couple of conversations that we've had and getting to know one another. And, I think we probably spent uh, time together first about a year ago. We put together an event in Austin, Texas that brought in some horses and in collaboration with a group called Natural Lifemanship. If you go back on the Easier Business podcast, you can see an interview with Tim Job of Natural Lifemanship where we talked about that event. But you were there, Julie, and I had the first chance to kind of spend some time with you there. And and so this kind of brings us back almost a year later to where we are today.
Yes. It was a great time. I really enjoyed that event. I It's amazing what we can learn about ourselves in the presence of horses and how it translates to how we are in the presence of other people. It can really mirror that situation for us.
Yeah, this Easier Business project for me has been this wish for a little more flow and a little less grind. And that's
I love it.
a short way for me, in my mind, of saying that I want my next 20 years in business to be a little easier than the last 20. And that begs the question of what's important to me. What are my values? What do I
Mm.
want this business to do for me or for my family? What am I hoping for? And not just be carried along with sort of the inertia. I think a lot of businesses also gain a certain kind of momentum that they just kind of grind onwards, and it's always, a pull towards putting out the next fire. But if anything, this project for me has been a chance for me to step back from my other businesses and say, what do I really want to create and what's most important to me? And I think that's something in your career you had to ask yourself too, didn't you?
I did. Yeah.
There was a
I
moment, your background in business is kind of, can you tell us a little bit about why you reached a point where you had to do something different?
Well, at 35 I burned out as a CFO. And I had really got so caught up in the momentum of my career and the pressures of work. I really lost connection with who I was. I remember going to an acupuncturist and he's like, "What can I do for you?" And my throat clenched up, my body kind of clenched, and I just started crying. I had completely lost connection with what was going on with me. And that separation from how I was taking care of myself and how I was performing at a high level, they didn't match. And it contributed to why I burnt out.
There was a time then where you basically had to do a kind of a reset, right? And ask yourself what kind of
Mm.
work you wanted to do, why you wanted to do it. And that's been some time now. You've had some years to kind of navigate through new ways of working, new kinds of work that you're doing. As you look at this today, you've come together with this program that I want to talk about and want to introduce to the audience because I think it can really help us kind of recenter ourselves
Mhm.
and give us a new clarity that comes from inside, not from being pulled or demanded or all the things that otherwise happens when you're running a business. Tell us about what the name of that program is and kind of what the intention behind it is.
Well, the program is called Claim What Matters to You, and it's all centered around the self connection success model. And that model puts self connection at the center. Then from there, we expand out to values clarification and expand out to goal setting. What I experience is people think we need to do it all or nothing. We can either have self-care or we can accomplish things, and we need to compromise our self-care and our self-connection to accomplish things. And that I don't think that that's true. I think we can, when we have self-connection, it's the core of our success because it has the core of self-care. For example, self-connection is determining what you need, want, and desire. And something I hear regularly is the man who speaks about making his bed. You just have to get up and start accomplishing the small tasks. I think we have the ability to get up, and the first thing we do is take care of something we need to do for ourselves. That could be, I've been thinking about this for a long time. I need to have this conversation with the person. I'm making that call today to clean up my mental space. Or I've been upset with this situation for a long time, and I need to have this communication with this person about this upset. It could also be, I just need some quiet time to reflect and write down like the things that I would feel good about accomplishing today.
You mentioned a minute ago this word goals. And I
Mhm.
think so much of to kind of the beginning of the year, businesses sort of set their goals, they plan budgets or at the end of the year for the following. And the goals of budget spending is tied to what we're going to accomplish with how we spend this money. And certainly there's the pressure for growth. And
Mhm.
yet, I think one of the things that was helpful to me when I was speaking with you about goals is when that goal setting happens and what happens first and how we think about goals. So I think that's kind of something I'd like to get into with you is a sense of for someone who's trying to bring more intention and meaning to the work that they do, a first kind of impulse can be, I'm going to make some goals.
Mhm. Yes.
But could you kind of take us through maybe another way of thinking about that and tie it back to this question of claiming what matters to you?
It's interesting. The discussions I've been having with clients lately is they equate goals to more stress. So there's something getting skewed about how we relate to goals. It used to be goals motivated us to move forward, to do something that we've never done before. And now I think the way people are relating to goals is they're pushing back against goals because of the pressure for growth. So it how I lead people into this is usually goals are based on SMART goals, some kind of specific, measurable, let me
Actionable,
actionable. Thank you. I tried to forget that model. and and so anyway,
time-based.
time based, yeah, and repeatable or relevant or something like that. Anyway, they're an external performance. And what I've heard people say is they don't want to set goals because they don't want their boss turning their goals against them when they aren't met. So there's that relationship to goals.
Now, if we're listening to this audience, I think a lot of the audience is the boss listening, people who own
Okay.
companies. And that may be where they want to hold people accountable, right? There's
Right.
some desire for accountability, which is certainly understandable. And then for the overall business, the performance, I mean, sometimes for a business owner, the biggest sort of thing that they are creating is the value of the company itself. Like the product is
Mhm.
almost is the company that they're building someday to perhaps even to sell. And so there's could be a goal mentality like I want to grow the value of this company to a certain level.
And if that is the goal without a foundation, you create a toxic work environment. You create unrealistic goals and then you beat people up for it. So it works both ways because in order to have a goal, an accomplishable goal, you also have to have the resources you need. And what we do in goal setting is we don't look first at what we need, want, and desire. that then becomes really what's the value we're delivering. If we get our needs and wants met in alignment with what we desire our business to be known for in the world, that core is going to create a different goal set than just setting goals from an external performance.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. What led you to those kind of insights? Was there something that you had your experience of burning out as a CFO and then went on a different path? And so what was it that prompted you to come to that realization?
Well, on a very personal level, I had somebody ask me like what I wanted and needed. And I was so used to working with what I had, pulling it off, getting it done. I didn't need anything. I'll make it work no matter what. But what I realized is that was a symptom of being disconnected from myself. Because when we don't know what we want, it's almost always because we don't know how we feel, because we don't know what's important to us. And when I recognized that, I started seeing, oh, a lot of times I overcompensated when my needs weren't met. And then that became the expectation. So, what was happening for me is I was performing in spite of what I needed, but that became the expectation. And what it did for me is it created more stress for me, even though I was able to perform under that environment. And I didn't ask for what I needed. I didn't communicate what I wanted. And so that separation, that gap grew bigger and bigger for me. And yes, I was performing my duties. I was getting my job done. I was accomplishing all these things, but I was burning out faster and faster.
Yeah.
So there is this balance of when we get our needs met, we are set up to thrive. Just like a business, if they have all the resources they need, chances are they're going to succeed as a business.
Yeah, I think you're kind of talking about your experience in a management team where you were at the C level, you were responsible for certain financial, performance
Mhm,
in the company or accountability there probably, but you were working to the demands of an owner who
mhm.
probably was pleased at your hustle and your hurry and the capacity for you to get shit done,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And that was probably working for him or her, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was very much so. But here's the thing, it wasn't working for me. And I didn't know how to communicate that because I wasn't connected to what I needed and wanted. Because I was used to going without, getting things done, pulling it off, pushing it through, hustling, grinding, whatever you want to call it. And
Yeah.
so I think as business owners, it's a great place to look at what do you want your business to be known for, both externally and internally. The way I define needs and wants and desires, needs are our basic requirements. They're what we have to get the job done. Wants are preferences. They're nice to have. They're not deal breakers. But if we're not getting what we need, it needs to be a deal breaker. And desires, when you're applying it to a business setting, you could think about that as your vision or the purpose you want to serve.
I think part of what I'm imagining a company that thrives looks like is a management team that can work together and solve
Mhm.
problems and be collaborative with one another, that feels like they can give and take back between each other and help each other when there's undue pressure or stress.
Mhm.
And so I think a lot of times for the owner's perspective, there there can be this um, desire to drive the management team to perform.
Mhm.
And what I think that the claim what matters sort of mentality can do instead is to start to um, develop a relationship among the people on a management team that feels better for everyone and actually enables the owner to step back a little bit and not be so in charge and yet still see progress, still see the performance that they're
Mhm.
hoping for.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think
Self-connection, like when I know what I need and want, it's easier for me to ask for it. So without demanding, but without denying that they're a need. Does that make sense?
no, tell me more a little bit about what the difference is.
So in my experience, and I know this isn't all businesses, but in my experience, it's sort of, well, here's the goal, meet it no matter what. It doesn't matter if you have everything you need or everything you want, just meet this goal. That's what we're really up to. But to collaborate, if you and I were working together and I'm providing you a financial report, wouldn't you want to be able to communicate to me if you want it to be accurate and complete? In order to trust my work, you need to know that I have a commitment to accuracy. But I also have to know that you have a need for accurate work to build trust. And so if I bring you a report and you say, Julie, is it accurate? Well, it was the last time I picked it up about 2 weeks ago. It creates this lack of trust. But if you could say to me, what I need from you, Julie, is an accurate financial report, that starts to communicate a standard that I can perform to.
So is the trouble then when we start adding time-based demands around that desire for accuracy, like, and I want it done before the day's over?
Yeah.
I mean,
Like,
I had an
like
employee
yesterday.
when, yeah, I had an employee one time who was many years my senior, and he said he'd worked in many large companies over the years and somehow ended up on my team. And I remember him telling me, Patrick, you know, you can't see the whip, but you can feel the pressure.
Mhm.
And I took it as a compliment at the time, but I think he actually meant it as an accusation.
Yeah.
So how do we bring in this some sort of time-based accountability with the desire to be more connected to what we really need and desire, that in a way that doesn't feel too fluid, like, well, whenever we get around to it? Because I think this part of even the dilemma with goal setting is that there's this idea of, there's a measure, there's a quarter, there's an end
Mhm.
of year, there's this time-based connection that we're going to bring a lot of pressure around. And so maybe you could kind of even back up if you need to, but help us, if someone who starts to kind of go through a program like this, Claim What Matters, how do you reorient and sort of build this foundation of understanding around what matters to them, and then eventually bring some sort of time-based accountability into it later, I imagine, but you tell
Mhm.
me.
Right. Well, the thing is when we have clear communication, it creates efficiency. It builds trust. So a lot of the time saving and the miscommunication is eliminated. But it could also be sometimes we have to adjust ourselves to reality. I have seen a lot of business owners who want things done right away and they ask for it in the moment, but they knew they needed it a week ago and they didn't communicate it until that day. So, one of the things that I encourage people to do, like I was alluding to at the beginning, the first thing you do in the morning is you get up and you get a need met. So the first time business owner that you know you need that report, you get it into dialogue. Hey, this report, I'm going to be needing this report. I'm going to talk to you in 2 days about it. And it's going to be used in this way. Will you save me an hour? Will you save me 15 minutes? How much ever time you want to talk about the report that's needed?
Yeah. I think I did something like that an hour ago. It's Friday as we record this, and I think I asked for something at the end of the day before Monday.
Yeah.
And I was like, I should know that. I think at some point this is like in the day-to-day mix with people, but I imagine that the Claim What Matters program is really also more about for the person at a level that's deeper than just their business day-to-day performance.
Mhm.
So so help me understand why that's important and how that self-connection leads us to something a little more deeper or purposeful even than just the, good performance in a business setting.
Well, there's three components of the claim what matters to you. And the first component is self connection. And we really dive into needs and wants and desires and values. But there's also this premise of setting boundaries. And the way I define boundaries is boundaries communicate how two things come together, how this team needs to work. Boundaries aren't always about, I'm not going to. In fact, boundaries serve three purposes: to protect what we value, to help us navigate life. Those are the stay in our own lane boundaries, and to guide us, like guide us towards what's important. They help us prioritize. So if I want to be a good business owner that is able to produce out in the world, but also have a good team that works well together and efficiently produces whatever we're creating in the world, it calls me to be a certain way. And those boundaries that we set around our own behavior guide us to do that and become that as a business owner. And once we start to be able to communicate our boundaries, we actually start having better conversations that lead to better outcomes. But it starts with self connection.
Yeah, I had another conversation in our interview series with a woman named Dr. Andrea Hollingsworth, and she was describing, we had a conversation around sarcasm in the workplace and empathetic connection with people. And I think
Mhm.
it reminds me of where sarcasm shows up. There's this like underlying irritation that we're not directly addressing.
Mhm.
And it shows up as this sort of passive, aggressive, sarcastic kinds of element. And I'm not sure if you are the one who told me this, but is it the case? And maybe this is a conversation we had before around when we feel critical, it's a sign of our boundaries having been
Oh, yeah.
impinged upon. Did you tell me that at one point?
This is criticism is one of my boundary signals.
Yeah, a boundary signal. So tell us what that means and how we understand and interpret that.
A boundary signal is what puts me on notice, like it's my reaction or something that happens in the external environment. So it's my reaction that puts me on notice that I'm about ready to cross my own boundaries. And I'll give you an example. When I was in my CFO position, I needed things done right away and I could pick apart what wasn't working, but I wasn't good at communicating what was working and what I liked. So it was hard to meet sort of my demands or my expectations. And what now, like years later, what I recognize is when I'm criticizing something, buried deep in that is something I care about. And if I criticize to the point I get to what I care about, to what I need, want, or desire, I can actually ask for it. But if I've never learned how to ask for what I need or want, I will stay in criticism. And then I will be sarcastic and passive aggressive because I'm not getting what I need.
Hmm. I had a situation in one of, a lot of my work is in the e-commerce area. And as a consultant, we are reactive to the requests of our clients. And in an e-commerce context, it's 24/7, 365 because the store is never closed.
Got it.
When things break, it has an urgency to it. And I found myself on the phone earlier today with an unexpected and urgent crisis with
Mhm,
respect to one of our e-commerce clients. And it's a big company. It's something like I feel huge pressure to say yes
mhm,
and to make it work for them, you know.
yeah,
Same time, on a Friday at noon, my wish and deep desire is to
mhm,
be on a jujitsu mat because there's an open mat that I go to where we train for an hour or two, and
Mhm.
there's this like big tension of I could feel myself like not wanting to have to give up this sort of sacred time that I set aside during the day, and yet there's this encroaching boundary that like, well, but we promised to fix things when they're broken urgently.
Mhm.
I could feel like this tension building up, and I think until recently, I would have just worked through my noon hour and tried to solve the problem. But I found myself, I knew I was talking with you later. I was like, no, this is, and I was able to sort of ask them, this is something that actually can wait until we can look at it later in the day. And even so far as we'll have an update for you on Monday,
Yeah.
which feels like a long time for me. It's almost 72 hours, and in e-commerce kind there can be problems with that. But his expectations were actually, yeah, oh, that's okay. Yeah.
Mhm.
Monday morning is actually okay. And I found myself, coming back even this conversation. I've had my training, I've been thoroughly wrung out, make connections with my friends. And now I can come back to the rest of the day and feel like I have the spaciousness to not be critical and resentful and feel like sarcastic as I sort of end my day. Because that was sort of, I don't know if that's a good example of a boundary, but does that example bring anything for you to observe about?
It's excellent. You might not have used the word need or want, but you communicated what you needed or wanted. And when our needs and wants are met, it sets us up to thrive. So you're bringing that to the interaction with your customer instead of the, oh, now I'm going to miss my sacred time on the jujitsu mat, right? And you kind of come into this space wonky. I think I think the balance in that is there has to be times when your needs and wants take preference. Like, I really need this because I know if I take this hour, I'm going to come back in a better mental space. I'm going to be more engaged and we're going to be more efficient. That's what you're cultivating when you go take care of what you need or want.
Yeah, I think that's been very difficult for me. And I think one of the things that I have given a lot of attention to in the last year or so is to sort of flush all the sarcasm out of my system.
Yeah.
And I think like that's a good goal, write that down. Like sarcasm, cross the line out. But
In
I
the
don't
first quarter of the year.
um, and I want to say that I have felt relatively successful, but I didn't quite realize until looking back and even some of our conversations that we had that it does depend upon being able to clearly set boundaries
Yeah.
and also be able to understand deeply what does I want.
Yeah. The thing is boundaries naturally arise when we know what we need, want, and desire. But when we have a need, if it goes unmet for a little while, it might not do any detriment. But if it goes unmet for a long time, we will become resentful, bitter, burnt out. It's because we're not setting ourselves up to thrive. And so, what happens when we don't distinguish what we need and want, or we pretend that somebody just said, I just throw all my needs into the wants bucket and I don't need anything. And I said, how's that working for you? Oh, well, I do recognize when I do that, those relationships suffer. Yes, they do. But when we distinguish what we need and want, our boundaries naturally arise. And the other way I talk about boundaries is boundaries communicate what we care about. So a boundary might be like with your client, because I desire having a long-term relationship for you. I want to show up when you need me, but I also want to be in a space that I can actually deliver something that's impactful to you. And so maybe I need 2 hours and we can start working on this project. Does that work for you?
Yeah. I think that's a
because
useful example.
you're going to bring a different version of you to the table.
Yeah. So does your program help someone then kind of work through that reflection on what it is that is of most important? How
Always.
do you claim what matters?
We go through this process of identifying needs, wants, and desires. And it's so amazing to me as we go through that process, values just start naturally popping out. And when I've worked with people initially with a values clarification first, it almost always comes from our head. They value things like hard work, integrity, tolerance. I have never, in all the time I've spent guiding through people through transformational processes, had somebody desire fun, joy, happiness, ease, efficiency. Never.
But they really want those things.
Yeah, when it comes, push comes to shove, that's what they want. Last month, I actually had somebody declare love as a value.
But they didn't start there. They didn't start with some, let's list all the values that are meaningful to you and narrow them down.
No,
It was through the different path that you're describing, taking people through.
no, that was through the values clarification. What I do is we distinguish needs, and then we distinguish wants, and we distinguish desires, and then we go through 3 practices that help you really flesh out what your needs are. And so you actually get some processes that actually flesh out what you're really needing. I like to look at needs not from Maslow's hierarchy of needs because needs are not linear. Needs should be met in the moment and ongoingly. Most of us think what we need is food and shelter. And that's true, we do, but just because you have breakfast in the morning, check. Do you have to eat again later in the day? Yeah. But from a relational perspective, if well, one of the basic human needs is to feel heard. And I have a great example that I lead people through in the course that really puts this front and center. But if you and I are having a conversation and you're distracted and you're not listening to me, it creates a reaction like people might say, "You're not listening." Right? Be snarky or sarcastic. "Oh, your phone, your business is more important than I am." However we want to word that. But we need to be listened to. We need to be heard. And so it happens when we're actually talking, but when you and I have our next conversation, I will need to be heard in that conversation too. Now, you and I have a relationship where we've been able to adjust times to accommodate each other very willingly and really something I'm always interested in with the people I'm working with is can we create what works for both of us? I don't like to be ramrodded around and I don't like to ramrod people around. So I'm always looking for workability, but I have to be able to hear, oh, I can hear that Patrick is saying he needs more time. And I have the ability to adjust my schedule so I can make that accommodation. But if I was in the quote accountability mindset or the blame and shame mindset, instead of creating a connection and collaborating with you, I might say, well, Patrick, it's your schedule. You scheduled it for 1:30. Show up.
And so I think there's this kind of tension between consistency or
Mhm.
expectations. This is how we do things in our company. And then this other somewhat more flexible
Yeah.
need. So I think those are good examples. Is there another component to this program that you take people through beyond the needs, wants, and desires? What else happens next, or what do they go through?
Well, the boundaries piece is really around well, one module we work through is making the invisible boundaries visible. And that's a big concept for a lot of people because people know it when their boundary is crossed. But what happens is before the boundary is crossed, there's a boundary signal. And in that space between the boundary signal and when the boundary is crossed, you have a place to build connection with yourself, with who you're working with. You have an ability to create some workability, and you actually can communicate that. So most people wait until their boundaries are crossed because they're not used to communicating what they need, want, and desire back here to create efficiency, workability, ease. So, but people are like, well, where's the boundary? If I'm working with somebody who's always doing sloppy work, and they give me their report and then I have to redo it because it's never delivered in the way that works for me, you're taking on their work instead of being able to slowly communicate it back to what the expectation is, what creates workability for both of you. And healthy relationships actually work for both people. It doesn't mean I'm always going to win or you're always going to win, but sometimes I can make concessions because 99%, well, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. 99% of the time, I believe Patrick is going to do what he says he will.
Mm.
But there are times where he gets new information or he gets a phone call this morning that, based on when we made the agreement to meet today and meeting today, he's got some new information. He's got some new priorities with this client calling him.
Yeah. I wonder if I could use an example at a level that's more significant, I suppose, than the day-to-day. I had a conversation with a client of our eBusiness Pros e-commerce
Mhm.
agency. And it's a lot of times we become involved with companies when they have some desire to build out their online e-commerce sales channel, and they already have an existing retail storefront or more really a factory, and they're selling things to distributors and they have a whole this business. So we kind of come into their business where there's some sort of inflection point where they're trying to grow, they're trying to do this new thing. We help enable that in the online channel. But I had a conversation with this owner who was really feeling this this pressure to grow.
Mhm.
And a lot of times that growth requires debt. So
Mhm.
there was a new opportunity that they had a chance to expand to another facility, a bigger factory, a bigger, it actually was a farm and there was a whole process involved. And it was going to mean about, well, a couple $1 million more in debt.
Mhm.
And they had borrowed money and had, been paying off a multi-million-dollar note for many years and basically were almost done paying it off, had been successful. And there was this like expectation or desire, like, okay, well now borrow more money and expand even more. Like it's
Mhm.
been successful, you've paid it off, double down, borrow even more, and launch yourself into an even greater valuation in the future.
Yeah.
And there was great intention behind this vision, architects, planners, banks, financing, and basically all last year this owner just sat with it and like couldn't take the next step.
Mhm.
And I wonder if like this is the kind of thing I think that the Claim What Matters program can be helpful for someone who spent a year kind of mulling and almost ruminating. For some reason there wasn't this big yes,
Right.
and there was a sense of the burden that this would place
Mhm.
on them and their family, right?
Yeah.
On the one hand, tremendous upside potential, good track record, all systems seem go. And then there's this deep sort of like resistance, like
Mhm.
it's not a yes. So I wonder if, like, for situations like that, that feels the kind of weight that business owners carry on the shoulder. Like, I'm wondering how your program might help someone who's facing that kind of dilemma. How do you tie that back to what the owner wants and matters most to them when they're facing a dilemma of that magnitude?
Well, this is I wouldn't handle that in the program. This would be more of an individual coaching situation with me.
Of course, I think that that's a substantive dilemma, and you do work with people individually. But I think that at the root of it, though, there's this rumination over the last year of, well, what do I really want? What does matter to me most? And so much of the business owner's expectations of success are defined by top line sales growth, right? Paying off bigger and bigger debts to make bigger and bigger payoffs, to have bigger valuations in the future. And it drives our schedule, it drives our day-to-day life, it drives our weekends, our relationships, because we're trying to like deliver on this big expectation we set for ourselves. At the same time, I think the owner of this company, he's got a teenage boy. And that teenage boy is only gonna be in the house for like another year and a half. Does he
Mhm.
want to double down and be completely absorbed with his work during the last sort of moments of his teenager's childhood while he's at home? There's something there that like is holding on. Like, what matters in that relationship to him, right?
Well, there's a lot of different ways you could look at this. What I'm hearing is in business, there's such a pressure to grow and drive that it's actually like this external force that's sometimes propelling us along that somehow if we're not at the edge of the wave, we're not surfing, we're not doing it right, we're inadequate, we're not enough. In fact, I worked at a place where I was speaking with a billionaire's wife. And I knew I was having a magical moment with me when she said this. You know how I know when my husband isn't feeling good about himself? And said, do tell. And her response was, he grows his business. So there's that perspective. Are you caught up in something that's going on inside that's driving you to perform? Because when our needs are not met, we do one of two things. We either overcompensate, we grow our business to prove we're adequate, or we shut down and we don't need it. I don't want that anymore. And so, what I'm hearing in this example is there's something unconscious that's either getting in the way. It's something they're believing about themselves, about business, about success. There's an unconscious limiting belief there, or they're really bumping up against what they truly think they should want, but they don't want because the goals aren't connected to what matters to them. So it becomes kind of this rabbit hole of when we're caught up in momentum of things and expectations of what success looks like and how business should be, how much choice do we really have? We become puppets. And it's not that we can't perform to that level. The people I work with, for them, I want it to feel authentic, deserving, genuine. I want them to work from a place of they know who they are. They're just working from their natural gifts and talents. And this is just how life goes for them. They're not out there trying to prove or earn.
I'm reminded someone yesterday said, when you're in a hurry, you're not self-remembering.
Mhm.
And that was from the perspective sort of of a Sufi sort of saying around self-remembering, and Sufi is sort of a mystical path of Islam. And
Mhm.
the self-remembering is not the same, I think, as your self-connection, but there's a thread that connects them. And so I think that's that kind of forgetfulness of, when we hurry, sometimes we're driven by expectations that are not our own. And the
Yeah.
self-remembering is sort of the reminder of coming back to what matters, where I
Mhm.
come from, our essence.
And how powerful would it be when those two things come together? Like you can remember who you are and what you're about and accomplish and be successful. That's the balance I bring to the table.
Yeah, I think that's really important, and part of what I was hoping to encourage as people are thinking about, whether this program Claim What Matters is of interest. So for
Mhm.
someone who's liking what they've heard so far, what's a good way that they start to kind of begin and learn more about how this program works?
Well, everybody comes into a central course where we identify what they need, want, and desire. That is the core of working with me. It's really I keep pulling you back to who you are. And so that's the first step. And then once you take that course, you can go into the bigger course.
Yeah. Well, I think that's something worth checking out. And I think so much we bring in all of our sort of self-image or expectations of what we've done in the past. And sometimes it can kind of become such a burden that we don't have a way of sort of stopping and getting a clear reset and saying, where is it, that I feel most drawn today? What is the thing that matters most to me? And I think that's one of the things that I didn't quite know at the time, but last year we put together this program that involved spending a couple of days with some horses in a round pen. And I think that's, one of the things that struck me, that came out of that weekend, and you were there, was when you walk into the round pen, the horse doesn't have any projections or expectations upon you. You've got people around this pen, and if the owner of the company walks in, or the CFO, or just, the person who answers the phone, there's no real deference or anything than the horse being like, who you are right now, standing before me, is who I'm going to be responding to. And in some ways, that's a very interesting experience for people to put themselves and have that kind of honesty, right? It's kind of see
Mhm.
right through all the titles and baggage that we kind of otherwise carry around. So I think that's kind of that getting back to, um,
I think
it's like,
that's what's missing in a lot of people's lives right now, especially at this time and in our shifting, I will say, the last 3 years have really brought a lot of changes and a lot of relationships have broken up. The way we work together has even changed. And do we work remotely? Do we work hybrid? Do we all come to the office? All of that has changed so much. But the thing that remains is we benefit from belonging. And so we don't have that honest reflection. In fact, the two people who have most recently gone through the fundamentals course, the small course of Claim What Matters to You, both of them have said they just want to know where they stand with people. So, one of the things we talk a lot about is what do you appreciate? What do you appreciate about other people? And then how do you communicate that? So, a lot of times it's for me, one of the things I appreciate is when I am being a putz or a jerk and somebody is gracious with me, I'm like, oh, thank you. Right. I'm so glad you didn't jump into this and help stir it up. Like you held this space for me to be a jerk and you didn't react to me and you were still gracious with me. And I got to see what a jerk I was. I didn't like it, but now I can go, oh, when I'm a jerk, it's because I know I didn't get my needs met. But now I know how to communicate going back to them and saying, thank you. I was a jerk and you were kind and I really appreciate you for that. I'm sorry.
So all those bosses who are jerks is just underlying a lot of unmet needs. Is that what's going on?
Possibly.
I was at a dinner party just the other day, and someone had been describing their childhood or their experiences and how they were acting, and at one point he said, people look at me and they're weird, and I say, I'm not a jerk. I'm just like everybody else in my family.
Mhm. Yeah.
Oh yeah, uh, but that's the expectation, right? That's the sense of what was normal. That's how you, and
Yeah.
basically it's a story of a childhood where no consideration of what the child wanted in any context was even allowable to think.
Yeah.
No boundaries.
Right? And what we do is we look at the kid and we say, "Oh, I can see that kid's not getting their needs met and I have empathy for them." But so where we get lost is those kids grow up into adults, and that's exactly how they present themselves.
And this person who made this statement is a man of extraordinary capacity.
Mhm.
Man,
Of
get
course.
can get amazing things done, can direct, can be such a
Mhm.
force in the world.
Yeah. And when we have unmet needs, we're either overcompensating for them. So I will get big and I will take control and I will do these amazing things, which is a benefit of unmet needs. But there's also a cost
Yeah, I mean, this
because,
this person, just for example, has nearly died in the last year through exhaustion and
yeah,
poor health. So
yeah,
it's like this palpable moment of reflection. That's kind of what the nature of the conversation was.
yeah. And my thing is, what what would have become possible for him if those needs were met and he had those abilities? He could probably be just as impactful in a more kind and loving way.
And a little less grind, a little more flow. So
Yeah.
that's what I think I'm aiming for. Well, Julie, I've enjoyed talking with you about this, and what you've brought to this program should be of interest to the people who are kind of interested in these things you've heard us talking about in the last while. I think this program is worth taking a closer look.
Yeah.
So where should they go to find out more?
JulieRipley.com.
All right. Well, thanks so much for talking with me.
Always a pleasure. I enjoy my time with you, Patrick.